Number two, IMF, International Monetary Fund, is an agency of the United Nations, UN. And you can find that in your Henry Campbell Black's Law Dictionary, the 6th edition, in page 816. So when the trolls get on and try to tell you that we're making this stuff up, which they will do because they have to do what they're paid for to do, and many of them have been beneficiaries of the ignorance. However, do some research for yourselves and then recognize how you've been attacked by persons you thought was your government and how they've been systematically attacking you over generations and have brought you to this low ebb, which you are right now. And with many people not knowing where to turn, particularly since within months, many of the people will be thrown out on the street in their on the curb, based on alleged debts that is claimed by persons who claim to be government and who have taken censuses and claim to you to be U.S. citizens and then claim to you to be subject under their American law and actually stealing your estate, which is a completion of the operations of Unam Sanctum and the Doctrine of Discovery. It's not racism and prejudice. It's Unam Sanctum, Doctrine of Discovery operations. However, you must understand that people who are Aboriginal, who have copper complexion skin, are the Americans. And if you don't make the claim, because you are the American superior, understand that you abandon the last vestige of rights of claims that are left that they haven't already stolen. Problem of it is many people are not aware of it, which is why we chose the title, Aboriginal Titles, versus Unam Sanctum, Doctrine of Discovery operations and claims made by the colonial operators. Meaning that we're making the distinction between the true Americans and the fake ones who are claiming to be Americans that look like this. We used to call them, our forefathers used to call them paleface. It's not a negative. It's only to make the distinction, understand that a paleface is not an American. And that's not to put them down. It's not a slander. It's not intended to be. It's intended to address a problem that really needs to be addressed, because our people are being destroyed by the day. This is aside from the fact of the ritual killings and assassinations that they do with our people to keep them in a low state of mind and in fear in relationship to their rights, not only to the land, but their rights to even life, their rights to travel, etc. All of these are by practice under Unam Sanctum and Doctrine of Discovery being attacked and abridged by the fake Americans. And they're not Americans, by the fake hybrid Europeans claiming to be Americans. Number three, the United States has not had a treasury since 1921 AD. You will find that in 41 Statute, Chapter 214, page 654. Number four, the United States Treasury is now the International Monetary Fund, known as the IMF. So when you hear them saying the U.S. Treasury, the United States Treasury, they're actually talking about the IMF. Know that to be the fact. And that would be found in Presidential Documents, Volume 24, Number 4, page 112. United States Code, Title 22, etc., 284, 2887. Number 5, the United States does not have any employees because there is no longer a legitimate United States. No more reorganizations. After over 200 years of bankruptcy, it is finally over, and that is known as Executive Order 12803. I repeat, Executive Order 12803. Number 6, the FCC, the CIA, the FBI, and NASA, and all of the other alphabetical gangs were never a lawful part of the United States government, even though the United States government, through its trustees or representatives, which you know as the congressmen and senators, etc., all held stock in the agencies. So the truth of the matter is, this can be proven in U.S. versus Strang, Strang, 254 U.S. 491, and in Lewis versus U.S., etc. Now, these can be referenced in law and in law cases so that you can see that these persons who are claiming to be congressmen and senators are actually trustees for the foreign FCC, CIA, FBI, NASA, etc., which are all foreign entities operating on the land under the Doctrine of Discovery and under Unam Sanctum operations. And so therefore, you need not be confused about what's been happening to you and your family and your children, and where as commercial mercenaries have been systematically and ritualistically pulling men and women out of cars, out of their vehicles on the streets and murdering them before a lot of people, and nothing occurs, even though people may be standing there with cameras and cell phones, etc., and they not understand why this stuff is happening, etc., and may protest or complain, but they need to know that those are Unam Sanctum operations. And those persons are sent out there by those very people you've been calling your congressmen and senators, who are trustees for the IMF, actually, and not literally and honestly, not your government. They are actually, in this unfortunate reality, your enemies. They're not your government, although they're governing over you. You must make that distinction. They are not Americans. They are Unam Sanctum Doctrine of Discovery operators and members of the Roman Curia. And I know it's uncomfortable, but you need to get over it and start getting real about your life, because they've been real about starting to take the people's lives without recourse. 7, Social Security numbers are issued by the United Nations. How many of you knew that? Now you do. That Social Security numbers are issued by the United Nations, and the United Nations is the IMF. Keep that in mind. So when you see the US, the IMF, and the United Nations, they're all one and the same extended entity operations under Unam Sanctum and Doctrine of Discovery, under different names to keep the people confused. So Social Security numbers are issued by the United Nations through the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and the application for a Social Security number is the SS5 form. And the Department of the Treasury, which is really the IMF, issues the SS5 forms and not the Social Security Administration. That's a front and a fraud. It's issued by the International Monetary Fund. And the new SS5 forms do not state who publishes them, while the old form states they are from the Department of the Treasury. And you'll find that at 20 CFR Council on Foreign Relations, Chapter 111, Subpart B, 422-103. So keep this in mind. These are common things that should be known by everybody in their everyday operations, so they're not continuously blindsided by the political and economic attacks which are made by persons who keep claiming to be your government, who keeps claiming to be your mayors, who keeps claiming to be your governors, who keeps claiming to be your congressmen, who keeps claiming to be your senators, and keep claiming falsely to be creatures of the Constitution and treaties, both of which they are not. They are in fact imposters and operators for the Doctrine of Discovery, and their claims upon you has created the false so-called national debts that they've been perpetrating against the people, and then which they are now making claims to collect on, which is really what the debt is and what the real problem that you have going on in what is known as world trade markets, or windows freezing up, and the credit markets freezing up, the credit windows of the world freezing up. And of course, in the process, their claims are to be recognized as debts, and their claim are and have been for substance, that is gold, silver, and the people's estates, i.e. the land, and all of it, not just the fiat that has been issued, the private commercial paper that has been issued by members of the Curia under the Federal Reserve. It is also the mortgages and deeds that they have falsely placed on the land since 1913, upon which they have been making their claims. And understand the counter to this. Number one, with the Aboriginal people, their counter to this, because they have very few defense mechanisms left, because they have been pretty much subjugated almost totally. And the families have been destroyed, private and personal relationships have been destroyed, and their economics has been destroyed, and therefore they have very little resource to fight back with. The international principle and the divine principle upon which the right of claim is made is called nationalization. That's number one. The estate claim would be what is known as Aboriginal title. What's been taking place around the country in small areas and small venues, and the information and the activities have been suppressed. The civic activities have been suppressed, and most of these activities have not been published for the public to go over. But you'll find it taking place in the Western Hemisphere and in other parts of the world, and up north to Australia, etc. Is Aboriginal peoples, i.e. Moors, making Aboriginal claims in the corrupted judicial systems, and in some places winning. For those of you who are able to do some research, you can look at a couple of cases that are going on right now in this current time in Canada, or what you call Canada, etc. And one of those cases I'll share with you in the future. That was one of the things that I was going to introduce tonight, but because of time constraint and because I was actually busy, I had limited time to get things together and make my travels down here. So I'll use a future reference for that. But I want you to look at Aboriginal title cases, contemporary and current, going on in the Western Hemisphere, or activated at this time in the Western Hemisphere, and you're going to find some of those cases which are happening. However, what we've been trying to do, on another hand, is get the Aboriginal people at North America who has been wrongly governed and misgoverned and miseducated and misdirected at North America under Roman Curia members who are owners of the United States Corporation Company, which is an occupational colonial force of subdivision of the hybrid Europeans of Britain, of Europe, etc., of England, etc., to become active and to start making Aboriginal claim of the land, etc., and logically all accoutrements in relationship to it, including the resources, are part of their right of inheritance. To interrupt, or what you would call to obstruct, or to escheat the Aboriginal people, it has much to do with the clever legal processes of obstruction that have been known traditionally as branding or tagging, and the nom de guerre systems, which most of you know about, etc. So brands would be terms, not consanguine pedigree identities. They would be terms. Such terms have been known as Negro, Black, Indian, Latino, nigger, persons of color, etc. All of these terms which have been trained by the Gates Foundation for the people to accept as consanguine are in fact nom de guerre, but the purposes that they serve for the progenitors of these tags is that it disconnects the people from right of claim and also disconnects them from a lawful process to make Aboriginal claims, because there's no such people that have claim to the land. These are persons who are tagged by hybrid European colonial occupiers in the Western Hemisphere. Although these tags have been promoted and projected around the world via media, via filmed, via reconstructed books, etc. However, they're still false, but their purpose and function have been very successful for the hybrid Europeans in making their so-called American claims, and therefore taxing people and charging Aboriginal people to rent their own lands. And this has been going on for decades, and our people didn't even know that the rents that they were paying on their own land is all a fraud. But they assumed that the people who were governing and who had set up municipal government were actually legitimately Americans, when in fact they were not, are not, and never will be. However, and it's unfortunate also, is that the true Americans have to stop claiming to be something in who they are not, i.e. that includes all of the nom de guerre that I just mentioned and other tags that were put on the Moors, etc., the Almoracans. So when you hear me say Moor, that's simply short for the Almoracans or descendants of Moroccans, etc., the true Americans, etc., many of which and of whom over the years being miseducated by the Frederick T. Gates Foundation, which is the partner of John D. Rockefeller, who set up the entire education system, the General Education Board, which is that the foundation of all your learning institutions operating on our land particularly since the area of 1902, have had control over the people's points of reference, etc. And of course, the doctrine of discovery is the claim where, from a legal perspective, that the hybrid Europeans have been claiming land parcels all over North America, etc. And you also, for some of you, and my son, Dr. Hannibal, had shared with me a video earlier this week. We were talking, and he shared with me a video, which I'll share with Dr. Nail a little later. And you'll see, even with the treaties with many of the Americans, our brothers from the South, known as Mexicans, whereas they are bringing up the treaties where these hybrid Europeans have been claiming areas of California, Texas, etc., which are really part of Mexico, Nevada, etc., and from a law perspective have proven these people to be a fraud. And rather than give the land back, they're burning a lot of the land, etc., doing fracking to make the water toxic and things like that, relative to the future potential of the people regaining rights to their land. However, I'm also encouraging the Aboriginals of the North to start becoming more active than you have in relationship to your birthrights and your nationalities, and make rights of your Aboriginal title claims, even though there will be resistance, because it's, put it this way, their intention is to kill you off. Your intention is to be passive and inactive. It's almost like what you would call a surrender or an abandonment of your claim of right to the land. And of course, a surrender that you're surrendering those rights. And a lot of people are not aware that a lot of the political activities that are taking place right now on the planet, with a lot of the biological warfare that's been instituted against and upon the people right now, that they think is something else, is part of the doctrine of discovery operations, because they recognize that the people are waking up and they really need to accelerate killing them off. And there's two other things that they've been doing systematically to accelerate the genocide activities, and that is where they've used the Christian black codes to become between men and women, whereas you'll see in these days men and women are, rather than harmonizing with each other, are competing with each other as enemies, and think that each of them are the problem, not knowing that there's a puppeteer in the background. And that's these people who you thought was your government, who are actually executing doctrine of discovery policies. And it's actually gotten so bad that you'll see that many men, and I've known many of them, and actually even myself being among them, that don't even participate in that mating game anymore, knowing that if you deal with someone who's under the Christian black codes, that they will indeed destroy you. And it doesn't mean they don't care about you, don't mean they don't love you, etc. But they don't know that there's a puppeteer behind all of these operations to break up families. And in reference to their directives under the doctrine of discovery, many of you who have Executive Order 11490, well-known, commonly known as the King Alfred Plan, and the Rex 84 Plan, where they inform the politicians and the corporate owners of corporations under them to do such things that are necessary to dissolve the families of all Aboriginal peoples. And I think a lot of times people don't pay attention to it because they've been sacrificing some of their own in order to cover up the doctrine of discovery operations. And so when the people start seeing the destruction of the families, etc., and the destructions of relationship by virtue of the social engineering, they'll say, look, they're doing this to everyone, as a rationale to overlook the fact that the Aboriginals are and were the target. However, the collateral damage that is done by throwing, as some people use in the colloquial term, throwing under the bus a lot of so-called lower class and middle class hybrid Europeans who they will tag under the Wiggumore Party as white people, is 1854 Knights of Columbus Ku Klux Klan oath, where the hybrid Europeans start calling themselves Americans and then start calling themselves white Americans, etc. Understand that that is a political platform, a train of thought that is promoted in 1854 on up, etc. However, they're being thrown under the bus in the collateral operations of Unam Sanctum claims and doctrine of discovery claims. That you'll read about these activities in under such titles as the middle class is being destroyed. You'll hear those terms in the main media, mainstream media. Middle class, jobs lost, things like the airlines are getting ready to lay off 100,000 people, terms like that. What that really is, it's ongoing genocide operations where they're sacrificing some of their own to cover up the Unam Sanctum doctrine of discovery operations. Again, this is why it's important for the Aboriginal people to start making Aboriginal title claims to try to save, because we understand this, let's be real about this. Not going to save a lot of people, because a lot of people refuse to deal with knowledge. A lot of people have been late to the responsibility of self-governing or trying to govern their own lives. And a lot of us are going to be sacrificed because of the ongoing, not coming, the ongoing war against us, etc. Dr. Nail, yes.
I just wanted to add, you were talking about the relationships between melanated men and women being, strained and under attack.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm looking at on the page of BLM, You know,
it's part of it.
and I'm looking at about them. And so when you read this, it says, we affirm the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all Black lives along the gender spectrum. Our network centers those who have been marginalized within Black liberation movements. What's missing from that statement are men, our melanated men. They don't say anything about the man. They don't say, I mean, of course, you know, folks that have been folks with records, but not all of our men have records. So they don't specifically say anything about the man,
of course not,
about the family,
of course not,
and what they're, you know, what they're about has nothing to do.
Of course not. Now, the system's not broke. The system works very well. The problem that the people have in general when they look at things like this, right, is they look at it from the perspective that, quote unquote, the system is broke. No, the system works perfectly, and it has the system instituted under Doctrine of Discovery has been successful in dissolving the family. You got to remember, and this is not a mark or a strike against people who are either gay or lesbian or anything like it. It's not even a strike against them. That has been pushed as part of the genocide operations. See, just like this, a woman and a woman does not produce life.
True.
And it's against nature. It has nothing to do with the person or the person's personality or whether they're good people or bad people. We're not even condemning it. You know, we just look at the facts. A man with a man produces no life. Woman is the gate of life, no matter how you twist it, fold it. Man and woman is the foundation of nature of life in all species, in nature, in divine law. That's not condemning people who are gay. That's just a fact. But what the people don't understand, I think very often, because you'll see them emphasizing it now or getting people to accept it under the guise that they care about people. But people should care about people because they're human beings, not based on their sexual orientation. But you notice how that's skipped over, because the fact of the matter is this is the fact. All right, number one, males are outnumbered by female by nature, because this is how nature works, right? So if they can separate families, get young males to start thinking about trying to be a woman, inducing the young males that they cannot make a living to serve their families unless they do drugs or sell drugs, because they'll lock them out of other parts of resource acquisition or control. Use women to promote this, and use women under the Black codes to emasculate their men, which will cause a greater divide. And when you have men who would have a desire to support and to protect their families, to be condemned by women as being anti-feminist type thing. And then you have jailing of young men at a very young age. Then you have them being drugged in schools. Right. Now keep this in mind. Nurses, school nurses, feeding prescriptions to children, even against parents' wishes. They're not doctors. And they're not pharmacists. How is it that they are licensed to drug children? It's because they're targeted. So you'll see them, if you'll see a lot of these activities in school where they're drugging the children, if you do any research, you'll find that the major target is young males. Usually the women or the young females are more protected, and so people don't pay attention to the fact that they're attacking the young males. And this is actually part of the genocide operations of Unam, Sanctum, and the Doctrine of Discovery, to tear the family apart. And of course, these young men growing up are not aware until a later age that their role as protectors and providers for their families have been neutralized at a very young age. So many of them get out into the world of family totally handicapped, totally disabled, having no access to the resources of the land, not knowing that the land is theirs, having no access to the economics, not knowing that the resources that create the economic are theirs, thinking that the people who are governing over them and their families, whether under the guise of human services or family services, etc., under the Margaret Sanger operations of family planning, under the abortion clinics, which are all part of the Margaret Sanger operations, of the genocide operations of Unam, Sanctum, and the Doctrine of Discovery, having no idea that these are actually continued institutionalized acts of war against them.